Hey, welcome. Hey, welcome, and thank you all for joining. This session is called From the Frontiers because it's not really based on theory. It's based on some of the real projects where I have applied AI security standards to some national scale systems, and I've learned some lessons I want to share today. How do we make security standards actionable to uplift cybersecurity for the AI era? A little bit about me. I lead AI security at Kynos, one of the top five UK AI suppliers. I've worked on government, healthcare, and finance projects, on national scale projects. And so that has given me quite a lot of hands-on experience. I have also been very active in the standards area. Both at the community standards. I'm a part of the OWASP Security, certainly OWASP GenAI Security Project Board, and I co-lead the Agentic Security Initiative. I represent OWASP at the US NIST AI Safety Institute. I have written a book that's a best-selling book on adversarial AI for practitioners. And I have also authored the UK government's implementation guide for the Code of Practice for AI Security, which has now become a edge standard. And we'll talk quite a bit about that because it's the core of my approach to AI security. When we started the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, it was early days. People didn't really know what to do about securing AI. That was a catalyst. That started a whole process of guidelines. And today we're very lucky to have quite a broad range and comprehensive set of guidelines that tells us all about the mitigations that people have to follow. And that's great and reassuring. However, it creates an avalanche of standards, and sometimes that can be quite overwhelming to people. And then we have standards fatigue where people don't know where to start. And sometimes they take the easy option, which is just tick box security standards without really understanding and applying them. And so we do need a strategic compass to say, hey, based on what I do and where I am in the life cycle, because not everything is a single step, it goes through your life cycle. I need to have something to tell me that this is where I apply those specific guidelines. Otherwise, I'll struggle to progress. And this is where initially the UK AI Code of Practice, Security Code of Practice, and now the actually baseline AI security requirement standards come in. It employs a very clear should, could to provide an indication of whether something mandatory, recommended, or optional. And it recognizes also the different roles within the process, and it aligns them all. I put there the diagram into the life cycle, starting from the design, which actually covers the getting started, the governance, and all the way to development, deployment, and maintenance. It covers secure life cycle, supply chain, and it maps actually the implementation guide that I wrote and has been adopted as part of the standard. It uses scenario-based examples, and for different types of organizations, maps all those provisions to controls and to existing standards, including quite a lot of the OWASP standards, because OWASP has done a tremendous job in publishing AI security standards, but also NIST, the CSA, and our National Cybersecurity Council. At the moment, the standard is being harmonized with other standards like the EU Act and CENELEC, ISO. And there is a conformity assessment expected by the end of 2025, which will accelerate, I believe, adoption. The heart of the standard is built on a risk-based approach. It relies on risk management and threat modeling, consistent with most of other guidelines, to say that you cannot just gold plate or ignore risks. You have to be very contextual, and you have to decide what risks apply to you. And so threat modeling within the standard is a key, fundamental technique that we recommend. Something that has emerged since then that we will cover later on is the OWASP Compass, which is a complementary technique. And earlier today, my friend Sandy Dunn, who has been leading that initiative, has had a session on Compass. So I hope you have watched that, but we'll cover that. But overall, the point I'm making is that within the standard, within the fundamentals, we recommend threat modeling a risk-based approach. But that in itself, I don't believe is enough. And that's what I'm finding when I apply all those guidelines in real life projects. The threats and the use case, the similar use case, a similar set of threats can have very different outcomes depending on the organization that they're being applied. There are some macro risk factors that shape how organizations operate, and I categorize them throughout my experience. I've categorized them into 6: the sector that you're in, the culture within the organization, the AI strategy that they have, the skills and the resources. Are they in a competitive market? And what's the size of the organization? And I think if you don't take those factors into account, most likely you will fail, because your mitigations will not really, or your strategies or your AI security program will not reflect the realities. And this is where I've developed this meta framework, which is, not yet another framework. I can hear you say that. It's really, a very simple approach to help you bridge organizational realities to the security posture and the implementation of the code of practice, or actually, and any security, actually, AI security program that you have. And ASAP just aims to ensure that the security is right-sized, sustainable, and innovation-friendly. And it does that by understanding the organizational context, aligning it with a profile, which we'll look in a minute, and then map it into the implementation and the rollout of your AI security program. And that's the workflow in action, that you evaluate the context, you understand. This isn't a mathematical formula where you will precisely define what those macro factors are, but a kind of an understanding, a relative understanding of where you are, that helps you map the posture profile, map it to an implementation, the baseline security requirements, and you will see that in detail. Then execute your strategy. And of course, like everything else, you need to continuously assess and see that you have done the right decisions, measure your security posture, and make sure that you fine-tune and you tailor the controls based on your findings. Now, the posture profiles that I have here, it's very, very important to clarify that they're not part of the official EDSA standard or the UK Code of Practice. There are, roughly speaking, kind of corresponding 4 scenarios in the implementation guide, but those are just empirical guiding points to help you start. It's a baseline. The profile, the first profile is a baseline. It's the foundational controls for rapid deployment. Often we see it in SMEs and pilots. The more enhanced, which is a balanced approach for organizations that are scaling AI. And of course, for maximum assurance, you have the third profile, which is the assured profile. And as we will see, it's for healthcare, critical infrastructure, those kind of organizations. But it helps us really kind of gauge where the security rollout fits in. Again, quick reminder of the 6 alignment factors that we'll look into in a minute. The sector, the culture, the strategy, the skills, the market dynamics, and the organization size. Let's start with the sector. Many of the things that I'm talking about, very often implicitly or instinctively we understand them. And so all I'm trying to do here is to make them explicit and make them part of your planning and your decision-making process. So what we're seeing is in public sector, more accountability, more risk-averse organizations, and heavy focus on governance because of the impact and the consequences, but also the accountability those organizations have. And so extensive oversight, and usually they default to the top profile, 3 profile for comprehensive assurance, and they fine-tune it and tailor it depending then on the use case. But overall, you're talking about really, really maximum kind of assurance, comprehensive assurance, Healthcare is an interesting one where, because of the clinical safety and because of the fundamental aspects of medical data, in Europe, in GDPR, we call it special category data. Those require heavier protection because the impact is much bigger. You can change your password if someone steals it, but you cannot change your DNA if someone finds it from a genomics database. And it's interesting to see the cost and the impact. The healthcare breaches tend to have the highest average per incidence globally when it comes to security breaches. And so again, they tend to go for P3 implementations. Commercial is where the pressures are different. The requirements for compliance are different, with exceptions in finance, I would say. And so the faster business cycles, they often map to profile 2 implementations, sometimes for profile 1, for rapid market entries, especially if you have startups and small companies. What they do is they go for the baseline profile and then they plan the security uplift. And finally, critical infrastructure, energy, road operators, security organizations, because of the national security implications and the widespread society impact that they have, they always go for the enhanced assurance, the maximum assurance profile 3 implementation. And then comes culture. Regardless of the sector, the culture plays also a huge role in all this. So first of all, is there a security engagement in the organization? Do we have a proactive security culture that, for instance, users will know what to upload and what not to upload and the consequences of that? Because prevention in itself isn't always going to work. So the effectiveness of your security measures rely on understanding the user and engaging with the user. Otherwise, you will have very, very costly fixes, and I'm not so sure they will always work. And I think if you look at shadow AI, that's a good data point of how engagement is really important. You will see that 55%, in some surveys, 55% of users use unapproved tools, and 48% upload sensitive data. And you can try and ban all that, but in reality, it's really hard to restrict all that using the given that most of the users will use their own device and they can access those tools. Innovation appetite, that's another cultural element that affects. So risk-averse organizations, slower adoption, so they go for the maximum assurance profile, whereas the more risk-tolerant, they tend to slide from P2 to P1, depending on what the innovation appetite it is. And so culture, again, it's security engagement and how go-get-it the organization is. This often aligns to the AI strategy. And the strategy sets that urgency. If AI is core to your competitive edge, the boards will push for speed. And often people will feel that pressure. In fact, if you look at some of the surveys, very interesting, the IBM AWS Oxford Economic Survey, 82% of C-level executives said, well, security is really important and trustworthy AI to the business success. But 70% of them said they would actually prioritize innovation over security. So you can see there the contradictions and the dynamics, the AI strategy. So if it's core to your competitive edge, you will be pushed to have a kind of enhanced profile 2, or the baseline profile 1 for pilot, and then scale up. If you're doing exploratory phase where you have the time, you have the luxury of secure by design, then you get a P2 to P3 implementations that scale appropriately as you grow. But again, where you are with the AI strategy, whether you're left behind or whether you're ahead of people, will also set the pressures on security and the security outcomes. And that's why I think sometimes when cybersecurity professionals delay the adoption of AI or try to slow it down, I think sometimes that's counterproductive because the pressure will come back and take over and rush things. And cybersecurity leaders then feel that they can no longer be the barriers or the naysayers, and then they give in. So, finding where you are with AI strategy and factoring it in on the profile that you need to adopt is really, really important. But it isn't just the ambition. The capabilities is really a key point here. The skills, not just in AI, but in cyber overall, is the biggest bottleneck. If your organization has a strong understanding of AI, of course, they will have a better way to handle also threats, and they will have more mature ways to use AI. And what we see is that strong capability organizations with robust AI skills and awareness, they can actually successfully implement kind of advanced P2P3 controls, sustain internal knowledge. Whereas if you go to limited capability organizations, they tend to they tend to fall back on strong preventive methods that you find on P3 than compensate through process rigor. What's interesting to see there is that in the whole context of AI skill shortages, the lack of AI expertise in the security organization is seen as the biggest bottleneck for securing AI. And it's also interesting to see that in the latest, the UK government survey on cyber skills, 53 of firms use AI tools, but only 42 of them have trained staff on AI concepts and algorithms. So that creates shows a little bit, kind of the lack of investment. And it's interesting also to see in the market that only 4% of the core roles that are being advertised request AI skills. So that shows that how behind we are with the skills. And I think it's really important to factor into your AI security rollout and deployment, because you may specify all kind of great controls there, but there will be no people, they will have no expertise to implement them, and you will create really a castle on the sand. Not to mention that exercises like threat modeling, unless you understand those threats, you won't be able to do it very successfully. And sometimes those things are outside your control. The market dynamics very often define what is the security response to adopting AI. If you're in stable markets where the pressure isn't that high, stable industries, then you have a more deliberate adoption. You can talk about governance. You can talk about different controls and secure by design. So adopting P2 to P3 will not be a problem in those organizations with, depending on all the other factors that we covered so far. On the other end of the spectrum, in the hyper-competitive environments, imagine that you are in an environment where your competitor is leaving you behind because they launched a new product based on AI that's completely reduces the cost of service and takes all your customers, then the pressure will be for a P1 fast track implementation for a baseline profile, and then uplifted once the problem has been solved. An interesting observation is that what changes the attitude also is how customer trust is perceived in this market dynamic. So in finance and healthcare, where customer trust is fundamental, that becomes a core asset, and therefore the P3 posture is really key because it's part really of the market differentiator. But overall, competition will and competitive pressures will will make a huge difference to how plan and roll out your AI security program. And it's interesting to see that 2 in 3 executives see AI adoption as the key to competitiveness. So that will influence you, and therefore try to understand what the right gauges are to move there. And fundamentally, size sets practicality. If you're in a large enterprise where you have resources, you move slowly, but you can implement enhanced or assure profiles, the P2 to P3 implementations where they have extensive oversight, you have governance, you have the time to and the resources to actually implement those profiles that have all the necessary safeguards. You have dedicated security teams, you have approval processes, and also, most likely regulatory scrutiny and an established cybersecurity team. On the other side of the equation, if you're a startup, a small to medium enterprise, or even a local authority council here in the UK, a non-profit, then you don't have the resources to do all the great things that we often find in the standards. So a very lean and more pragmatic profile one, the baseline, or towards the profile to the enhanced profile, depending on your resourcing and size. That will be the best approach to maximize the security value with the budgets and the expertise that you have. SMEs is an interesting one. The Vodafone survey in 2024 showed that 32 of them didn't have any cybersecurity protections at all. So that gives you an idea that you can go there and issue all the standards in the world and demand for people to implement security. But unless you take that into account, you'll end up in a situation where people will tick boxes, but they will not implement anything, and therefore you will end up with a bridge. And so that's why it's really important to factor that in combination with all the other factors that we just discussed. And so how do we map this to the ETSI baseline or the code of practice? Well, we talked about the essential foundation profile one, the absolute minimum, the shall requirements, and that's clear ownership, a kind of either threat modeling, but in most cases you will not have threat modeling. So the Compass, the OWASP Compass methodology with the object orient, decide and act methodology is very agile. It gives you some basic AI inventory and ownership. And if you look at the examples that we have in the implementation guide of the small startup, it will give you a more detailed view of what that essential foundation looks. As you move to the kind of enhanced profile, the shoulds, you start adding the should requirements that are more relevant to you and more applicable to you. So having raised matrices, implementing SWORM, documentation, having more targeted exercises, more comprehensive coverage. Those are the things that you expect to do in a profile 2 and how they map into the code of practice. And again, if you look at some of the scenarios of the implementation guide, you will see what we mean. And finally, the maximum assurance, that's a complete set that comes with the code of practice, so the ETSI baseline security requirements. Fundamental to that, independent security validation, emergency response systems, and multi-party authorization controls, as enhanced as possible to make sure that it's strong security there, the strongest that you can get. I talked about OWASP Compass and I talked about threat modeling, and I kind of used them kind of in combination. They're complementary techniques, they're not competing, but within the context of ASAF and that contextual security, we can make some balancing acts here. So if you're in that end of the spectrum where speed and agility is really key, then Compass is ideal especially for the baseline profile one, but it can also be used either on its own or with a lightweight threat modeling in P2 environments. And that helps you incorporate that spirit of the standard, which is the risk-based approach, without being overwhelmed with very detailed threat modeling. On the other hand, threat modeling gives you depth, gives you that very systematic implementation. So it's essential for P3 implementations, for many of P2 as well. And in many cases, you don't have to choose one or the other. The combination, they serve different purposes and they bring different qualities, the depth and the speed and agility. Very often, different personas fit naturally to one of them. So if you're a cyber or a risk professional, then you will find Compass really, really easy to use. If you're a security architect or a solution architect, then threat modeling really gives you that familiar view of the system where you can identify threats and mitigation. So the point I'm making here is it's very clear that in ASAF that you don't have to choose one or the other, but you can bend the use depending on the profile that you have in front of you. And again, I will reiterate how the workflow works when you implement ETSI using ASAF. You evaluate systematically, and there is a lot of work that I could share with you on how to actually score and evaluate the topics that we discussed in the previous slides. Map to the appropriate profiles, decide which profiles are applicable to you, map it then to the guidelines of the ETSI, that's kind of implicit actually in the profile definition, rely on threat modeling or the Compass or the approach to then delve into risk more from a use case and system logic perspective and derive your mitigations, implement, and then evaluate and understand how sufficient that is and adjust as needed so that you can tailor it. And the outcomes, I believe, out of all this is you calibrate your security requirements so that the context tailor not just to the specific use case, but what is realistic and strategic in organization, rather than building something that people will not use or they will just tick box it. And that's, the proportionate also AI security rollout. Organizational context is part of that proportionality. And I gives you a flexible execution framework by giving you the ability to use either detailed threat modeling or Compass or both of them, and decide on the mitigations. And finally, because it aligns to the strategy, security doesn't become a break. You don't have to compromise. You don't have to choose between compromising strategy and innovation or security. By taking into account those 6 factors and analyzing them and finding the right mapping, you can create that sustainable and effective security that supports the business. And the key takeaways, standards are consolidating. Definitely have a look at the ETSI baseline AI security requirements. It gives you that strategic compass of what you need to do across the life cycle. Take into account the macro risk factors. Hopefully, I gave you an early introduction of how that works, because I don't believe use case and particular threats are the only factors that will determine your success. Drive the posture using that context, decide the right profile and map it to the right provisions of the ETSI standard, and then always kind of evaluate the outcomes to make sure that they're right sized, so effective and proportionate and sustainable. And I hope that gave you an overview of how to take into account all those factors that I found in my practice to affect the use of standards and guidelines in securing AI. Thank you.